my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And in just a minute, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news. Our guest this evening is Paul Davids. I'm really excited about having him on. He's a great guy, intelligent, witty, and he's done a lot of things you're going to find very interesting. I want to apologize for not having a show last week. I lost my dog, Peanut. That meant the world to me, and I just couldn't get it together to do the show. But I actually would like to dedicate this show to the loving, beautiful dog, Peanut. And with that, I'll bring in Alejandro, who met him, actually. How are you, Alejandro?
Hello. Yes, I was a big fan of Peanut. Even though he kind of growled, he almost kind of snapped at me a bit, didn't he?
Yeah, it takes. Well, that's because I was holding him. That's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
and
real
I snuck
protective.
up on you.
Yeah, he was protective. Yeah.
I snuck up on you late night.
Well, I showed him a picture of you, and I said, if you see this guy, just attack him. Yeah. But I just wanted to see if he was paying attention.
You're lucky I didn't bite him. I could have bit him. That was dangerous of you. I might have just, had a knee-jerk kind of animalistic reaction, and I might have bit him, and that would have been bad. I would have felt bad.
Well, you're vegetarian, so it probably wouldn't be knee-jerk.
Well, I wouldn't have eaten him.
Oh,
but
okay.
I might have just sniffed at him and been like, don't you bite me, kind of thing.
Yeah. So what is happening? What do we have going on for the news this week?
UFOs are happening. So it's kind of funny because, UFO news has been taken over by, we've talked about this so many times, the UK tabloids.
Right.
But they're so awful. All the stories are just junk crap stories or really old ones. And so I do look at them, and they're not worth even mentioning, I don't feel, except to debunk them or talk about how they're silly. So I don't know. I don't know if you've gotten any response, but why aren't they talking about this or why aren't they talking about that? And actually, I haven't really gotten that. I think people realize those UK tabloid stories are kind of silly, but they're so predominant on the Internet. And again, I don't have any of them to talk about because they're silly. And outside of those, there's in the mainstream, other than just regular sightings, not a whole lot. But I have some great sightings from Roger Marsh at MUFON.
Yeah, let's hear them.
Here we go. The first one is one from Pennsylvania, and this is you and I have talked about this one.
Oh, yeah.
So these are some photographs. Yeah. So some photos that this person took in Pennsylvania. He was in Monroeville. This took place on July 31st at 8:56 p.m., although it was still pretty light out at 8:56. That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Dun, dun, dun. Why is it so light out? But it's a daytite. There's some kind of shiny object in the sky. I think the photo that has the best picture or the most in focus, the object looks kind of square-like.
Right, like a box, sort of.
Yeah, box-shaped, and it's very bright. The person said it was changing colors. They did say that it hummed. They said it stopped fast in midair and then progressed again after a few seconds and then shot off at a very quick speed. Because of that, some people have thought maybe it's a drone. But and this person does say it was 5 feet near them, or 500 feet away. But when you see the pictures, it's at a decent distance. Now, he calls it an orb. Now, the rest of the pictures do look orb-like. However, I am fairly certain, having looked at so many of these dang pictures, that's just out of focus. And you can even tell from some sort of object that's also in the image, which should be a hard line, but it's a fuzzy one. So those photos are just really out of focus, and that's why it looks round. But it is an interesting sighting and some interesting pictures.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you just mentioned about being out of focus, but boy, does that ever look like an orange orb that you always hear about in that picture.
Yeah, I mean, it does, but it's completely out of focus. So many, I mean, you could go do that at any time. And many people do see this when pictures are out of focus. A point of light looks orbish. But, yeah. Yeah.
And there was something else in Pennsylvania, right?
There was something else in Pennsylvania, but I don't remember what. I was not going to talk about that one.
Okay. Well, that's fine.
What was that one? Let me see if I can see it here. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about one in Vegas. Everybody loves Las Vegas.
Yeah, let's hear that one.
Vegas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it stay in Vegas?
Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, this is a recent one as well. This was August 7th at 7:45 p.m. Now, this one, the sky looks like it's getting a little darker. But this one is a video. The witness feels like they captured two cigar-shaped UFOs. And they are something in the sky that is reflective. You can see this in the video. This is a person who says, he lived on SAC alert basis. So he was in the military watching aircraft, and he's never seen anything like this. And I think the video is sort of interesting. He captured this on his cell phone, and you do see these two bright objects. I mean, they don't seem to be moving quickly like airplanes. I suppose they could be. They're not shaped like balloons, but given that it is near sunset, it would make sense that they are reflecting the sun up in the sky. But it's hard to tell what these things are.
Now,
but another interesting one.
So were they moving in tandem or anything like that, did he say?
It's hard to tell from the video, I think, but it does seem like they are.
Yeah. Wow. You don't hear a lot about the cigar-shaped ones as much as you did, years ago. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while, you do hear about them. And I think it's interesting. I've heard more than one story where they say there's portholes in them.
Yeah. Especially, some of the older ones. Or, Betty and Barney Hill, for instance. I mean, I think theirs was disc-shaped, but they did see windows and stuff. But they're not the only ones to report such things.
Right.
There are some really great cases out there where people report stuff like that. Weird stuff.
Yeah. I mentioned on this show a couple of times about sighting. About a cigar that went through a mountain pass in Russia when I was talking to a guy with. Yeah, and that had portholes in it. And this is a guy that has nothing to do with UFOs. In other words, it was just a one-time sighting, and that something that happened in his life that he talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But, that is bizarre.
We posted some more interesting pictures of what this person felt was a dish-shaped UFO. This was from Missouri, Lee Summit, Missouri. This witness actually videotaped it, but they did not submit the video, just stills from the video. But this was on July 21st at 3:28 p.m., another daylight sighting, which are pretty rare, actually, are the minority, but some of the most interesting, of course. But, you do see in the photo this, it could be cigar-shaped, but, they felt it was a disc that they say moved across the sky. They feel the video evidence shows that it was moving at 2,000 miles per hour. Wow. But the video is not available. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Unfortunately, they did not make the video available. 2,000 miles an hour. And this is according to the MUFON field investigator. I think that, I don't know how they determined the size and the distance of the craft. I mean, they kind of made their own determination. Without triangular, however you say that. Yeah, you can't triangulate. You can't really determine that. Exactly. So when you had the guys on to talk about the Homeland Security video, and there's a ton of debate over the distance on that, even though that had a laser range finder. So yeah, I don't know. I would say that it seems like it'd be really difficult to determine the size of the object and the distance, given just these pictures and the speed. But it is pretty interesting, and the MUFON investigator was certainly very impressed. They closed this case as an unknown.
Yeah. Well, is that it for this evening?
That's it for the news, but can I tell people about something really cool that's free that they can watch?
I have an idea what it is.
What is it?
The MUFON Symposium in Florida.
No, that's not it, but sure, I'll plug that for MUFON because I'll be speaking there. That's not this weekend, but next weekend. In fact, a week from tomorrow, I'll be headed out there so I can at least enjoy a few minutes at Epcot, and then the festivities begin Friday evening. Right. But yeah, that's near the Epcot Center and all those groups of hotels there at Disney World. And it's the MUFON Symposium, so that's going to be a lot of fun. But I wanted to talk about this interview we did with Doug Trumbull.
Oh, yeah.
You've had Doug on the show. I've had him on my show. But this interview I really loved because I got to ask him some questions that I hadn't asked before. And we made it shorter, of course. The interview was about half an hour long, but, we've got it down to under 10 minutes even. So you just get the best of the best from the interview. But I asked him specifically what it was like working with Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick, especially when it came to UFOs, and if UFOs and his interest in them had any bearing on those movies, or why he worked on them, or what he did with them. And his answers, I thought, were fascinating. I mean, I call this my favorite interview ever just because those are my favorite movies. Those are my favorite directors. The special effects are amazing, and Doug Trumbull was in charge of them. So to hear him talk about how UFOs and the scientific study of them was a factor when he was working on these movies, and how important it is to him, I feel is really fascinating. So this is a video interview on YouTube. You can also see it on the front page of openminds.tv. We have it on the right-hand side. But I think everybody should take a look. It's something we did, it's free out there for you, and I'm really proud of it. I love it.
All right. I also tell the listener, too, you can go to the show notes on this show, and I'll have the link right there, right at the very top. You'll see it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Perfect. With your beautiful website. You got a great website.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah.
I enjoy tweaking it and making it a little better when I can. And also, I had a girl do the graphics that listens to the show, and I would do a shout-out to her right now and thank you and all that, but I forgot her name. Isn't that terrible?
Oh, no. Yeah, her graphics are great. She did a great job. So whoever you are, anonymous graphic girl out there.
Denise, I think. I hope I get that right. But anyway, thanks so much, Alejandro.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
All right, so everyone hang in there just for a minute for a quick music break, and we'll be right back with Paul Davids. That music is by Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse, a fan of the show, lives in Ireland, produces he produces music for movies and documentaries and all kinds of great things. Again, Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse, and we have Paul Davids on the line. How are you, Paul?
I'm good. Thanks for having me tonight.
Yes, I'm really excited to have you on. I've really enjoyed meeting you last February in Phoenix, and it was great sitting next to you out by the fire, doing your magic tricks. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean you're very well rounded. So for the person who is not familiar and has not read your basic information on our website, can you fill in, everyone, your background and top it off with how you get interested in UFOs at the end, if you would?
Okay. That's a big request because
Yes.
I unfortunately have a long bio, which is reflective of my advancing years now, I think. But I'm from suburban Maryland, where my father was a college professor at Georgetown in American history. I have a degree in psychology from Princeton. And after completing studies at Princeton, I was a student on fellowship at the American Film Institute, then located in Beverly Hills. And after it took me a few years to work my way into the film business, I did have some wonderful formative experiences with producer-director George Powell. In the later years of his life, you will remember him as the producer-director of The Time Machine. He produced the original War of the Worlds.
Really? Wow.
Destination Moon and When Worlds Collide. So George and I had the most wonderful colliding of spirits there, and we tried to launch The Hobbit together.
Wow.
It was ahead of its time. It didn't happen then.
Wow.
But then I found my way into producing for television, first with F. Lee Bailey on his show Lie Detector. And we actually had Betty Hill on that show.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. We can get more into that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more about that later.
Then I progressed from there, if we call it progress, to working on the Transformers shows for Marvel. And the original cartoon episodes. And I was the production coordinator, which was a hard, meaty production job of having to do everything by the clock and keeping the schedule going because we produced so many of them. And I was involved. I added them up, and it's 79 episodes of the Transformers. Wow. I wrote a few of them, too. So then it was Star Wars books, sequels for George Lucas. That was a lucky break, getting that contract. My wife and I ended up writing 6 sequel books for younger readers. This was in the early 1990s. And my first film as executive producer was Showtime's Roswell. And that's where I'm best known in the UFO community for that film. The film really made a mark, and it had Kyle MacLachlan and Martin Sheen and Dwight Yoakam. It had a very good cast and was quite well reviewed, well received. And I think it's been on TV. I can't even count the number of times now. Maybe 100 times. And most people in the UFO community are aware of the film, although it's maybe been a long time now since they've seen it, because it came out in 1994. I'm very proud we were nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Television Movie for Roswell. And after Roswell, I embarked on many years, from then until the present really, of producing my own independent films, most on a fairly low budget, but they did get very wide worldwide exposure because NBC Universal ended up distributing more than half of my films to television around the world. They did some of them on DVD and video. And, films were shown on the Sundance Channel, the Sci-Fi Channel, and cable television around the world. So I'll rattle off a few of the names, see if your listeners remember films like Timothy Leary's Dead, which is the bio of the LSD guru of Harvard. And I did a film about Van Gogh, a humorous, a whimsical, fictional fantasy called Starry Night. And then
I actually saw that.
We could talk about that. That was a lot of fun, and I thought made a good point about the art world. I did The Artist and the Shaman, and then what's one of my better-known films was The Sci-Fi Boys. Really proud of The Sci-Fi Boys. It charted the whole evolution of special effects from the really early days when it was all done in somebody's garage and nobody knew how to do any of it, so they were inventing it as they went along, to today's fantastic sophistication in computers effects. And Peter Jackson was the host of that show for me, and very proud of that one. I then did Jesus in India, which was 6 weeks in the heat of summer and monsoons in India, going 4,000 miles across the country to some of the most extraordinary places, following the cold trail of myth and legend that Jesus was in India during the missing years. And that movie then took me to the Vatican, back to Princeton, where Elaine Pagels, the biblical scholar, got involved, and the Dalai Lama in it, the Pope of Hinduism. It is one I'm really, really proud of because it's a viable mystery about the missing years, and there's a lot of really interesting evidence. Nothing you could ever, absolutely prove, but a lot of interesting evidence. Wow. So then that takes us up to 2007. And then, if I get the order right, I did Before We Say Goodbye, which explores, it's a drama with Hispanic Americans in the cast based on a stage play. And it gets into Hispanic American life in New Mexico, but it also, with their Catholic beliefs, gets deeply into the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the mystery of the miracle of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. A lot of that in Before We Say Goodbye. Then came the Life After Death project, which I never expected to make, but it was released in 2013. It was first on the Sci-Fi Channel. It was in a DVD, it was a 2 DVD set because I had a sequel too, but it was about life after death and the really, really strange things that started happening to me after my mentor of 50 years.
Yes.
Forrest J. Ackerman, one of the founding fathers of science fiction. When he died, and he was an atheist, and he said he didn't believe in an afterlife, but with a wink, he said, if it turns out I'm wrong, maybe I'll drop you a line.
And he Martin, has, right? Along with your friends.
Martin, I can tell you my life has not been the same ever since.
Yeah.
Not at all.
That was incredible. Yeah.
It was that movie, and then I had to write it as a book with Dr. Gary Schwartz because we had scientific reports. We had so much stuff that it needed to be a book and a movie. And that book came out in April, and it's called An Atheist in Heaven. And then the latest, boy, I had to slow down, I think I'm ready for a long vacation. The latest movie, which is going to come out, I think probably within the next 6 weeks, from a company called Film Rise out of New York. I made a film called Marilyn Monroe Declassified. And actually, I don't know if you saw it at Laughlin. We showed it at Laughlin because there's a UFO angle in Marilyn Monroe because of document, purported CIA document on the strange circumstances for death. So it won the EB Award, I think, for Best UFO Film. It's about Marilyn Monroe. I think it's a really strong piece of work among my different films, and I'm really glad it's going to come out soon. So that kind of takes us up to where we are now.
Someone just, Jason on the message board just said he watched your film, An Atheist in Heaven. I believe that's when it was. Him and his family watched it and loved it. He just wanted to let you know.
That's good. Now, the film actually was called The Life After Death Project.
Okay.
And
well,
then the
I think
book,
you might have said that. Yes.
Then the book became An Atheist in Heaven.
Right. Okay. So I want to go back to, of course, one of the reasons you're on the show, I wanted to have you on the show, was the Roswell movie you did. I have heard, before I even met you or even knew about you or whatever, I'd heard a number of times that it's the most accurate film regarding Roswell. I watched it last night just so I'd catch up. I had watched it before, but I wanted to watch it again just so I could talk to you a little bit about it. I have some questions. We also did have a few questions that were emailed in as well. I'll get to those later. But
okay,
that movie is really very well done, and I have a couple of questions for you. One of them, you mentioned Martin Sheen in that movie. Was there a guy that actually was the character, or was that a fictional thing?
It was a fictional composite character. We called him Townsend, and he was, you don't know whether he's a deep throat or a disinformation agent. He tells the most interesting parts of the Roswell story and the parts that are least subject to confirmation. And we were heavily influenced by some of the material in the MJ-12 document in creating the role of Townsend because he takes us the deepest into the stories that involve, for example, was one of the aliens alive? The living alien. Was there communication? What about the strange death of Secretary of War Forrestal? Yeah. What about Area 51? And has there been continued contact? But the character does it in such a cryptic way. You can't tell whether he's delivering to Jesse Marcel the truth that he's been looking for so many years, or whether he's leading him down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the situation that all of us have been in with all of the information that's come out. Some of it, frankly, seems very far-fetched and impossible to believe at first glance, but we don't know where to draw the line between jumping in and accepting that something's probably true or withholding our belief. I mean, we're all challenged by people like Bob Lazar, who says, yeah, we've got UFOs. Yes, they're extraterrestrial. Yeah, they're sitting on a tarmac there in S4. You've got stories about alien genetics and alien viruses, and there's stories about people who claim that they've lived on bases in Mars, and people that have gone through time warps, and it gets very, very science fiction. But there is a core story to Roswell that has an enormous amount of testimony and solid support from reasonable and credentialed individuals. So that's what really draws me. But none of that is really what got me into it to begin with.
Okay, so I do want to hear that, but before we move out of the movie here, I didn't even know until I saw the credits that the movie was actually based on a book by Kevin Randall.
Randall and Schmidt.
Oh, right,
Randall
and Don Schmidt. Were they involved at all in the movie when you were putting that together?
Yes. The director was Jeremy Kagan, and he was very open toward Kevin Randall and Don Schmidt, and I think they had credits also and some payment as technical consultants, and they were on set. They were with us on location.
Wow.
The whole time. Don has a tiny little role in the movie as a bartender at one point.
Oh, really?
I don't think he has any lines, but he's there with the Sheridan Cavett character, and old Jesse Marcel.
I saw you had a little cameo in there.
I had a cameo in the autopsy room as the photographer who discovers one of them is still alive.
That's
and
right.
Says, yeah, just moved. But, the book by Randall and Schmidt was their first one on Roswell. It was called UFO Crash at Roswell. Later they wrote The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, which I think had less truth in it than the first book. And then I think that the crowning achievement was the one by Tom Carey and Don Schmidt called Witness to Roswell.
Right.
I know they've got a new one out now called The Children of Roswell, but the one
right.
Witness to Roswell, I wrote the foreword for the first edition, and then my foreword was replaced by one by Edgar Mitchell for the editions you can find now. But as I read that book chapter by chapter, I think it's the most solid piece written about Roswell that I've ever seen from anyone. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Okay, so now I want to hear what got you interested in the topic of UFOs.
Well, I think it all started with the sighting I had in daylight in 1987 from my house, which is in Highland Park, Los Angeles. It's kind of sandwiched between downtown L.A. and Pasadena. And Glendale and Eagle Rock. It's that area. Maybe it's 10 or 12 miles from the Jet Propulsion Lab. But, I was not a believer in UFOs before that. I hadn't really looked into it carefully. I loved it as science fiction. I talked about my connection with George Powell and the War of the Worlds. Loved science fiction, but real visitors from space, I was certainly a skeptic. Now, and I don't know. I don't have any way to know what I saw was from space. But in broad daylight, it precisely matched the descriptions of the domed discs that were reported in the summer of the saucers of 1947. And I saw it after my daughter, who was on the second floor of our house, she was 9 years old, and she screamed at me, just screamed at me to come upstairs right away because she could see a flying saucer. And I had been writing. I had been interrupted a couple of times, and I said, oh, come on, you sure it's not a Goodyear blimp? Check again. I don't really want to run upstairs. And she just screamed, Daddy, get upstairs right now. It's a flying saucer. Okay, so I ran upstairs, and my 6-year-old son, we ran into her room. We all collided at the same moment, and she pointed out the window, and I looked up into the sky, and it was about 4 in the afternoon. It's a very daylight. Dramatic sky of clouds. February 25th, 1987, the anniversary day of the Battle of Los Angeles UFO incident in 1942. And the saucer we saw was about 6 weeks after the very famous Alaska sighting, Captain Tarauch, the Japan Airlines flight. It was a fantastically well-covered case. So I was aware of that. And then I saw this dome disc. We stepped out onto the roof. It was absolutely silent, and it descended from high in the sky. We have these 2 trees in front of our house. They're very tall trees now. But this was in 1987, so that long ago, they weren't as high. And the saucer came down and was hovering at a height that was maybe 10 or 15 20 feet over the trees. And it was either over the road in front of our house or over the neighbor's house across the street. And it hovered there for a while. It did a little wobble.
I was just going to ask you if there was a
a little wobble while it was hovering. But when it moved laterally, it did not wobble. And it moved and positioned itself so that we could still have eye contact with it through sort of a hole in the leaves and branches of the trees. And I noticed that the underside of the craft became absolutely dead black for around 20 seconds, just really dark black in broad daylight. And it had kind of a waviness around it, like a mirage you're seeing when you're driving down a desert road. And then it took off by flying slowly down over the valley that we look down on because we're way up on a hill. It went over some tall palm trees, and it disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. I mean, it was just gone, like it had never been there. And both my kids saw it. I saw it, and we'd never seen anything like it before. And it was. People have suggested various things that maybe it could have been. I mean, the skeptic Phil Klass was always saying, "Oh, you saw a toy," No, it wasn't a toy. It in size, I think it was around the size of the cabin of a helicopter. We see a lot of helicopters fly over our valley. So, not real large, not large enough to abduct somebody into, and I don't know if it was piloted. I don't know where it came from. It's just, it was strange, it was silent, and it matched the descriptions going back to 1947. So because of that, I started reading every book I could find on UFOs, anything I could buy. I say it was the good, the bad, and the ugly. For me, that summer of '87 was the summer of the saucers because I was by the swimming pool with a stack of UFO books beside me, and I was devouring them at the rate of 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Now, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, if I don't ask it, I'll get emails. Why didn't you ask?
Yeah.
Did you think about taking a picture or a video?
Oh, my God, did I? But fate worked against me. Because that morning, the night before, there had been snow up on Mount Wilson, which we can see in the distance from our house. And you don't often see snow up there. And that morning, I had shot up the rest of the roll of 35-millimeter film in my camera. And there were a couple things. First, I didn't take a camera with me when I ran up the stairs because I knew I needed a new roll of film. And once I saw this thing, the idea of leaving my children to go get the camera, that wasn't going to happen. Yeah. Wasn't going to leave my children. And I was pretty sure that the moment I left, I'd never see it again. It would be gone.
I totally get that. I totally get all that. Yeah.
So helpless as I was in the situation, I just said to myself, just be the best witness you can. Just watch this thing carefully and remember it all. I told the kids to remember it, to watch. I had them draw pictures later. I videoed the kids talking about what they saw. And that started my intense interest. And it was really interesting what happened from there because my wife knew Robert Wise. We're both in the film business. And she knew Robert Wise, who directed The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right. Okay.
And she got me an appointment with Robert Wise, and I talked to him about what happened to me. And he confided that, yes, he was a believer, that UFOs were real and were from space, and that while he was making The Day the Earth Stood Still, he said he got some visits from people in Washington. And he said there were scientific people and engineers who talked to him and told him, your movie is not so much fiction as you might think. So he went on and on talking about how if this is a cover-up, he thinks it's so wrong-headed. He just felt it was such a mistake if they were really keeping this secret. And he referred me, the film The Invaders, the TV series.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Invaders. So the star of The Invaders came out to my house and did diagrams of what I saw. And he was actually the one that introduced me to Don Schmidt. And when Don Schmidt was investigating the MJ-12 document, he was then at the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. He was the director of special investigations, I think. And he came to my house, did a report for CUFOS, told me about the MJ-12 document and the research they were doing, and then I was hooked from that moment. He said, we're going to re-research the Roswell incident. He said that he and Randall writing. They'd written a 17-page outline for what became UFO Crash at Roswell. And I made a little option deal with them for the movie rights of the book they hadn't written yet. Basically, holding on to the rights of that up until they finished and published the book, and then giving me a little more time. And it was a deal that promised them some decent money as soon as I made a deal with a network. And, of course, after a lot of rejections, a couple of years of rejections, I mean a shoebox full of rejection letters, finally, because I hooked up with director Jeremy Kagan, my old friend, Jeremy loved the idea of doing this movie. And he went to Bob Cooper, who was then the head of original movies at HBO, and he set up an HBO deal with Eileen Kahn as a producer also. She was sort of, I think, she had a contract with HBO to make movies for them then. And I had known Eileen, and at first HBO gave us a lot of support. I mean, they made contracts with us. They hired Arthur Kopit, fabulous writer, wonderful playwright, very, very important writer. They hired him to write the screenplay, and it kept going through draft after draft after draft. I mean, after a year, I was just so jaded. We had 7 drafts, and they hadn't put it into production yet. And then they dismayed us terribly by doing something that in Hollywood we call putting it into turnaround, which means, sorry, guys, we're not going to make your movie. You're free to shop it to another studio or network, and if they want it, they can make a deal with us for the money we put into it so far, and you can have your movie back. So I was devastated, absolutely. It was the blackest day of my life when HBO threw us out because they were only going to make one flying saucer movie, and they decided to remake The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman with Daryl Hannah. You know,
that did real well.
I mean, I don't mean to sound sexist, but the truth was that the idea of 50-foot boobs was more important to them than uncovering the Roswell incident.
No comment.
But it was a blessing in disguise. You know, it was the cloud with the silver lining, because it worked out better. It worked because Eileen Kahn, she took the project then to Showtime, and I was just astonished how much they wanted to do it. I mean, it went right up the ladder of command there. And within about a month, they said, yes, we want to make this movie, and we're going to increase the budget from what HBO was going to give you, and they made contracts with everybody. Then we had to cast it. They wouldn't actually make the movie till we had somebody in the lead that they wanted to make it with. But the very day that they did make a deal memo with Kyle MacLachlan, they greenlighted us and told us we were approved for production offices and we could report to work on Monday. And then it was just, wow, zoom, zoom, zoom. We made the movie.
How long did that actually take to put together?
The filming, well, let's see, for pre-production, we had 5 weeks, which was not enough. I mean, it was not much time, because this is a period movie with 1947 cars and airplanes and costumes. And it took place in 2 periods, because there was also 1977, 30 years later, the reunion at the military base. It's a whole different wardrobe problem, a whole different set of vehicle issues. And we needed airplanes. We needed the B-52. We needed a military base that looked like 1947. So 5 weeks was what they gave us, because they didn't want us to still be shooting when Christmas break came. It would have been union problems for them. So we begged them for 6 weeks instead of 5. And after we'd been kept waiting to get this movie going for several years, they didn't have the 1 extra week to give us. So, you know, people worked 24 hours a day. We had great, great people working for us. I mean, Gene Callahan, I think, was the production designer, and absolutely top quality people came in and helped us with every detail. And then the location, deciding where to shoot it, was a really interesting issue, because you've been to Roswell, right? You know Roswell?
I've been in that whole area, but I've never actually been in the town of Roswell.
Well,
shame on me, right?
With no offense to Roswell, which has been very good to me. You know, they inducted me into the Roswell UFO Hall of Fame. But when I think of Roswell, I think of Denny's and McDonald's and, hotels that you would necessarily want to stay in. And, it doesn't look like 1947 at all anymore. So they made us shoot it in Arizona, which was a real affront to the people of New Mexico. This is New Mexico's greatest story. We filmed in Bisbee, Arizona for Roswell, which does look 1947, but it has hills in the background. And Roswell doesn't have any hills, so they said, who cares? Nobody except the people in Roswell are going to know that. So we didn't have any choice, but I want to say the experience of being on set, making that movie, was definitely one of the greatest experiences of my life. It was every dream coming true because everything worked. Everything connected. All the pieces fell into place. And then we got a beautiful music score, and people loved the movie. So,
yeah, I really did like it, and I want to just encourage the listener. If you go in the show notes, you will see a link to a video on YouTube. Unfortunately, you probably don't get any piece of that pie. But
I doubt it. Elliot Goldenthal, I think he was the composer. Beautiful score. Just the music really helps make it. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to find the DVD now. I think you probably can find it at Amazon, but most of them are used. And they had a 10-year contract on putting out the DVD, and at the end of 10 years, it dried up. They didn't renew it. And I tried to get them to, and they haven't done anything. And the rights are now kind of tied up in limbo land, but it had a great run.
Well, one of the people in our message board has a DVD. He just mentioned. Paul, just real quickly, you have some type of I don't know if it's your headset, but there's some type of microphone noise. Just be aware of. I don't know if it's turning on your head or whatever, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. So, also, one of the things I never really, really realized, and if it's true to the real story, is that Jesse Marcel was such the fall guy, the only real fall guy in the whole weather balloon thing. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was the pathos of that became the meat of the story for us. Because as we approached the movie and as Arthur Kopit wrote the final screenplay, the angst of Jesse Marcel, of having been part of what many think was one of the most important moments of American history. Not everyone agrees, of course, but those who believe that this happened would certainly say that Jesse was part of that he knew the secret. He was forced to keep the secret, and he was made to be the fall guy, to be the embarrassed dolt who didn't know the difference between a weather balloon and a craft from outer space. I mean, he was ridiculed. They needed a fall guy, and he was it.
You wonder what would have happened to the whole Roswell story if Jesse Marcel didn't talk about it on his ham radio, and Stanton Friedman happened to be in that radio station, and a guest not showing up, or whatever it was, a host not showing up, and someone saying to him, hey, you ought to talk to this guy over in Homer, wherever it was where Jesse Marcel was.
Houma, Louisiana, I think.
Yeah, right? So you got to talk to him over there, and if that one thing didn't happen, would there be no Roswell today?
Well, if there was a Roswell today, it would have come out later due to some other people.
You think so? Okay.
Well, there was one of the pilots who was on Unsolved Mystery, and his name is escaping me right now, but one of the pilots had told his wife that he flew the aliens to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I think that story eventually showed up in the Inquirer.
Now, from what I understand, this particular person you're speaking of only started to talk about it after he saw the story was out, and maybe I have that backwards.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right, and he might not have talked otherwise. But because we did have the advantage of hearing from Jesse Marcel, and he said on footage that was on Unsolved Mysteries that this thing that crashed there was not made on Earth. He said it couldn't have been.
Yeah.
He said, I was familiar with all air material and vehicles at that time, and this was nothing like that, he said. Now, what followed from his going public with that was a massive debunking of Jesse Marcel. They wouldn't leave him alone. They had to drag up whatever they could find that, did he lie about when he was promoted? Did he have any marks on his service record? Did he exaggerate his war record? I mean, they tried to tarnish his integrity and his reputation to continue to protect the secret. So much effort has gone into keeping the silence on this. And as Schmidt and Randall talked to the people involved, for example, the provost marshal, who was in charge of the MPs at the debris field, who was very tight-lipped about it and said he wasn't going to talk about it because he'd made a promise to President Truman that he wasn't going to talk about it. So he said, so I'm not going to talk about it. And they said to him, would you just tell us? They said, we have been going on the theory that this thing was extraterrestrial, that it wasn't from Earth. Could you just sort of give us a hint if we're way off on the wrong track? Should we be trying another track? And he said to them, well, I wouldn't say that you should be looking for another track. And at one point in the conversation, it was in his deathbed. On his deathbed, his family conveyed that he referred to the creatures. So that there were living beings recovered. That we've heard it from people who had cause to know. And I heard it myself from one of the people who was at Roswell, who was in the military then. I was at the National Museum of Nuclear Energy, and he was there giving an interview, and he really was there. He was guarding what was in Hangar 84 then, and he confirmed that it was, he said, not human. He said, terrible odor, terrible stench. Everybody was overcome with that. And he said it was just kind of really bothered him to look at it. He didn't look at it for long because he was told this is nothing you're ever going to be able to talk about. So I figured the less I know, the better. But yeah, that part. Once you have that part of the story, that there was living or deceased biological entities. Now you're into the realm. It just changes everything. I mean, it changes. If these are advanced beings that had a craft, that had a technology that surpassed what we have here on Earth, it just changes everything. And of course, in the decades, the more than half a century since then, so much of the evidence that we've gotten from witnesses and video and the Phoenix lights and so many cases all is confirming of that we have extraterrestrial visitation, and the officials will not talk about it. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, Forrestal, going back, you mentioned him, the gentleman that actually jumped out of the window at the hospital. suicide. He was portrayed by a well-known actor. I just can't think of his name right now. But was he really pushing them that you know of to disclose what was going on?
We can't prove that.
Yeah.
We can't prove it, but the reason the story took that turn is he's mentioned in the MJ-12 document as one of the original members of MJ-12. And, of course, you can argue whether that's true or not.
Right.
But his name is on that list, and it's logical if there was an MJ-12, he would have been one of those. And he had this terrible nervous breakdown. And they put him on the top floor in the Bethesda Naval Medical Hospital, which I grew up, just a few miles away from that hospital. It's the closest thing to a skyscraper that you have there at the outskirts of Bethesda.
And they
Maryland.
put him in the top floor. That's not a good sign
floor.
right there.
Yeah, with no guard, the window open. And, was he pushed? Did he commit suicide? Was it the UFO matters that he was so upset about? We can't prove any of it. I mean, it makes a fabulous story. It's implied by the MJ-12 documents. And when Congressman Stephen Schiff was doing his investigation into the Roswell incident that resulted in the Pentagon saying it was just a mogul balloon, Congressman Schiff was pushing through the Government Accounting Office. And I had an opportunity to meet with the head person at the Government Accounting Office who was spearheading the investigation. Because I made the film then, and I told him what I thought I knew. And I asked him, as part of this investigation, can you get access to Forrestal's diary from things that have not been released? Can you see the classified material and look and see if any of this comes up in that? And he said, yes, I will look into that. Now, whether he would have told me the truth, I mean, if it was classified, he couldn't tell me anyway. Because later he denied that he said he had looked into it, and he denied that, denied that there was anything there that would indicate, foul play or that flying saucers had anything to do with it. But I don't think he could have told me the truth. I don't know what the truth was. But I had the chance to ask, just like I had the remarkable chance to be a conduit to President Clinton on 2 occasions.
We do want to. I do want to talk about that one. One of the things I wanted to ask real quickly before we get off on that is someone had written a question here for you, and basically it is what evidence? If we kind of talked about it a little bit, but what evidence, if any, are you aware of regarding the Roswell crash bodies? Are you aware of any evidence of extraterrestrial survivor from the Roswell crashes? So this person that wrote the question, this sent me an email, just wanted to know how deep into that part of the story did you look into while you were doing this film?
Well, I looked into everywhere I could possibly get any information. And, my trail took me to the confirming of deceased bodies that were autopsied. I heard talk of the living alien, but nothing that proved anything to me. That one of them was really still alive and survived and was taken to a secret base and provided information. I mean, that's part of UFO lore now. And where all those stories come from, I'm not sure, because I don't even think the MJ-12 documents imply anyone alive. I don't think so. So it's a myth we live with right now, and it could be true, but I think just the fact that there were bodies that were autopsied that weren't human, I accept that.
Yeah, there was the nurse that. And the Undertaker, all that stuff.
Glenn Dennis's story,
right? And there's just so many moving parts to this whole story. for someone just to brush it all away as, just a weather balloon is kind of silly. However, there are some people in the UFO field that absolutely don't believe anything happened at Roswell, and still a number of people that think that. I think it's, as time goes on, it's just going to remain a mystery because...
I can say I don't think those people have had exposure to some of the same people that I have, because I've sat with astronaut Gordon Cooper. I've been with astronaut Gordon Mitchell and Jesse Marcel Jr. during the Air Force reinvestigation of the Roswell incident when they came up with Mogul Balloon, and they tried to coerce him into changing his testimony about the debris that he saw. He said that he got a briefing in Washington from someone very high up that confirmed that it was all true, and that kind of apologized to him for what he and his family had to go through, but said it had to still remain secret. So I heard that from Jesse's lips. I heard from Edgar Mitchell, about his briefing. Yes, there were aliens at Roswell. I heard from Gordon Cooper, who asked to meet with me after he saw our film. And he was the first to orbit the Earth.
Yeah.
And he had his own UFO stories that are in his book Leap of Faith. Fascinating. And he fought like hell to try to get the United Nations to get involved in UFO investigations, and he failed. But he told me that our story was really, really accurate according to all of his sources. So, and then of course I heard about the bodies from directly, from one of the people who was there. So these people that have decided to think that, nothing happened, I don't know why they think that, but they haven't walked the same path I have, that's for sure.
Yeah. We're at the top of the hour, and we're going to be talking about your Bill Clinton connection and all that in the second hour. Okay, so that's it for the free part of the show. If you'd like to become a supporter and listen to the full shows and all the show archives on your media player or on our website, it's a one-time sign-up, and you can find that on podcastufo.com for only $2 or more per month. And if you can't do that but want to listen to the whole show live, all you have to do is come to podcastufo.com or PSN Radio, and that is at 8 o'clock Eastern Time to 10 o'clock Eastern Time every Wednesday evening. Or you can also listen on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that is Thursday evenings from 10 to midnight. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with Paul Stone. We're going to be talking about USOs, that's underwater UFOs. Pretty excited for that show. That'll be back here next Wednesday. Again, dedicating the show to my loving one and only Peanut Chihuahua. He will always be remembered. Thanks so much, and keep your eyes to the sky.